Hello everyone, and thank you for being here. My name is Isla, and the story I'm about to tell you is about how the sweetest revenge I ever tasted wasn't a dessert I baked, but a life I built from the crumbs of the one that was shattered. For years, I was the wife of a celebrated chef, a man who collected Michelin stars like they were stamps. In his world of foams, gels, and deconstructed gastronomy, my passion for baking was seen as a quaint little hobby, a charming party trick. The breaking point, the moment that cleaved my life into a before and an after, happened in the middle of his gleaming stainless steel temple of a restaurant. It was a single, dismissive chuckle that did it. And now, holding an award he has chased his entire career, I can finally see that laugh for what it was, a gift. Before I dive into how a food magazine interview ended my marriage and started my real life, I want to welcome everyone who is watching. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from today. I love seeing how far these stories can travel. And if you've ever had someone belittle something you loved, if you've ever been made to feel small for your passion, go ahead and hit that like button, so I know I'm not alone. And for all the new viewers, make sure you subscribe and ring that notification bell, because this is a community for people who understand that sometimes you have to burn your old life to the ground to build a new one. To understand the end, you have to see the beginning. My life with Jonathan was, from the outside, a fairy tale. He was Jonathan Thorne, a name whispered with reverence in culinary circles. His restaurant, Aperture, was a monument to modern cooking, a place where food was architecture and dinner was a performance. I met him when I was young, a culinary student with stars in my eyes, and he was the visiting lecturer who dazzled everyone with his liquid nitrogen and his searing intellect. He saw something in me, he said, a spark. I thought he meant a spark of talent. I realized much later, he just meant a spark of adoration for him. Our home was an extension of his restaurant, minimalist, cold, and impeccably clean. And in that pristine world, I was the designated touch of homey charm. Family gatherings were always at our place because no one else's kitchen was up to his standards. His family, the Thornes, were cut from the same fine, stiff cloth as he was. His mother, Eleanor, was a woman who could deliver a compliment that felt like a slap. His father, a quiet man, simply orbited Jonathan's brilliance. They would all watch, mesmerized, as Jonathan would plate some impossibly complex appetizer, a single scallop resting on a puff of saffron-infused air. And then, at the end of the night, it would be my turn. I would bring out my dessert. I remember one Christmas Eve vividly. I'd spent 3 days working on a bûche de Noël, a traditional Yule log cake. It was my grandmother's recipe, intricate and delicate. I'd candied the cranberries myself, shaped tiny meringue mushrooms until my fingers ached, and tempered the dark chocolate for the bark until it had the perfect snap. I carried it to the table, my heart swelling with a quiet pride. It was beautiful, a piece of edible nostalgia. Jonathan's mother, Eleanor, looked at it and gave a tight little smile. "Oh, that's charming, dear," she said, the word charming landing like a dart. "So rustic." Jonathan, busy explaining the flavor profile of the post-dessert digestif he had sourced from a remote Swiss monastery, barely glanced at it. They each took a polite sliver, murmured that it was lovely, and then the conversation immediately shifted back to Jonathan's recent review in a major newspaper. My cake, my 3 days of love and labor, sat on the table, a forgotten centerpiece, a symbol of my place in their world, a sweet, unimportant afterthought. I was the woman who brought the charming desserts. I was the keeper of the quaint. While he was a serious artist, a culinary scientist, I was just a home cook playing with flour and sugar. And for a long time I believed them. I let their definition of me become my own. I shrunk myself to fit into the small, sweet, and simple box they had built for me. The pattern of dismissal was a slow, steady erosion of my confidence, as constant and subtle as the tide. It wasn't one grand act of cruelty, but 1,000 tiny cuts, each one delivered with a smile or a supposedly well-meaning piece of advice. I remember the year I turned 28. We had just moved into a larger apartment, one with a kitchen that looked like a laboratory, all gleaming chrome and induction stovetops. I'd fantasized about it, thinking this would be the space where my baking could finally flourish. Jonathan had been working on a new tasting menu for Aperture, a 12-course odyssey he called Metamorphosis. I was fascinated by it, by the precision and the stories he was trying to tell with his food. One evening, feeling a rare surge of courage, I approached him while he was sketching out a plating diagram. I had been working on a lavender and honey panna cotta, one that was light and ethereal, with a delicate, wobbly texture that I thought would be a perfect, gentle end to his intense menu. I presented the idea to him, my voice trembling slightly. I was thinking, for the final dessert course, I began, maybe something floral, but not overpowering. It could represent the final stage of the transformation, a return to something natural. He didn't even look up from his notebook. He just let out a soft, airy chuckle. A panna cotta? Isla, darling. That's sweet. But we're not running a trattoria. My desserts are conceptual. They challenge the palate. Panna cotta is what you serve at a dinner party. It's comforting. It's not serious. He patted my hand, a gesture of placation, not partnership. You stick to your lovely home baking. I'll handle the art. I felt my face flush with heat, a familiar sting of shame. I wanted to argue, to explain the nuances of getting the texture just right, the balance of the floral notes, but the words died in my throat. He had already dismissed it, and me with a single patronizing word. Sweet. The following year, for my birthday, his family came over for dinner. I didn't bake my own cake. I'd learned my lesson about bringing my own creations to the altar of his genius. Jonathan had prepared a spectacular meal, and as we sat around the table, his parents presented me with their gift. It was a beautifully wrapped box from a high-end kitchenware store. I opened it to find a frilly, pastel pink apron, embroidered with the words, "The Queen of the Kitchen." Eleanor beamed at me. "We just thought it was so you, dear," she said. "Perfect for all your little projects." My heart sank. A little project. That's what my passion was to them. At that very same dinner, his father raised a glass of wine and proposed a toast. "To Jonathan," he announced, his voice thick with pride. "We just heard from his publicist. The Michelin Guide is considering Aperture for a 3rd star." A 3rd star? The table erupted in cheers. They spent the next hour dissecting the possibility, discussing the critics, the competition, the sheer, monumental achievement it would be. I sat there in my new, ridiculously frilly apron, a prop in the background of his success story, the designated queen of a kitchen where I was treated like a court jester. The apron felt like a costume, a uniform for the role they had assigned me, and it was suffocating. The intellectual condescension was perhaps the most painful part. Jonathan loved to hold court, explaining the science behind his cooking as if he were a Nobel laureate revealing the secrets of the universe. He spoke of spherification, of sous vide temperatures down to 1/10 of a degree, of the Maillard reaction, as if he'd personally discovered it. One evening, I was reading one of my grandmother's old cookbooks, completely absorbed. He came and stood behind me, peering over my shoulder. "What's this?" he asked, his tone amused. "More of your historical artifacts?" I tried to explain the beauty of it. "This recipe is for a queen of puddings," I said. "It's a 19th century dish. It's incredibly clever, actually. It uses stale bread, so nothing is wasted, and it has this beautiful meringue top. It's about resourcefulness and creating something elegant from humble ingredients." He picked up the book, his thumb callously smudging the fragile, age-spotted paper. "Isla, it's a bread pudding. It's peasant food. My food is about pushing forward, about innovation. It's chemistry and physics. What you do," he said, gesturing to the book, "is sentiment. It's comfort. There's a place for it, of course. But you can't confuse the two. One is a craft, the other is an art. One is a memory, the other is a statement." He framed it not as a matter of taste, but as a fundamental difference in intellectual rigor. His work was for the mind. Mine was for some lesser, more emotional part of the soul. He made me feel as though my love for baking was a sign of a simpler, less sophisticated mind. And in those moments, I almost believed him. I would close my grandmother's book and feel a pang of foolishness, as if I were a child playing with mud pies while he was building cathedrals. The constant drip of his disdain was wearing me down, hollowing me out, until I wasn't sure if any part of me was real, or if I was just a reflection of his low expectations. My only true refuge was in those very books he scorned. They had been my grandmother's and her mother's before her. They weren't sleek, professionally published volumes. They were heavy, cloth-bound ledgers with marbled end papers, their spines cracked and their pages softened with time and the phantom dust of 1,000 siftings of flour. Her handwriting filled the margins, a looping, elegant script that became spidery as she aged. She noted adjustments, substitutions, and sometimes little personal asides. "A bit of orange zest brightens this on a rainy day," or Henry's favorite for his birthday. These books were more than just collections of recipes. They were a lifeline to a legacy of women who created magic from butter and sugar, who built celebration and comfort with their bare hands. They were my secret world. Jonathan saw them as relics, dusty and irrelevant. He'd once picked one up, blown a cloud of imaginary dust off the cover, and said, "I'm surprised this thing is still holding together. You should probably have it archived or something. It's not exactly practical, is it?" To him, practical meant modern, efficient, and sanitized. To me, the smudges of vanilla extract and the faint, sweet, papery scent of the books were the whole point. They were a testament to a living, breathing tradition. I dove into them, not just as a baker, but as a historian. I started researching the origins of the recipes. I discovered the political and social stories hidden within them. I learned about Savoy cake, a confection from the 17th century so light and airy it was considered a marvel of engineering, made without any chemical leaveners, relying solely on the power of whisked eggs. I spent a week trying to perfect it, my arm aching from whisking, determined to achieve the texture my great-grandmother had described in a margin note as like eating a sweet cloud. My first 2 attempts were dense, eggy failures. I nearly gave up, hearing Jonathan's voice in my head about the futility of it all. But on the 3rd try, as I folded the flour in with a touch as light as a whisper, it worked. The cake rose in the oven, pale gold and impossibly tall. When I took it out, it was so fragile I held my breath. That small victory felt more significant than any praise Jonathan had ever received. It was mine alone. I found recipes for Depression-era desperation pies, where cooks used crackers and vinegar to mimic the taste of lemon or apple when fruit was an unaffordable luxury. These weren't just desserts, they were acts of defiance, of ingenuity in the face of scarcity. They told stories of resilience. Jonathan would walk into the kitchen when I was experimenting, wrinkle his nose at the unfamiliar smells of nutmeg and boiled cider, and shake his head. "I just don't get why you're wasting your time with this stuff, Isla. There are reasons we don't cook like this anymore. We have better ingredients, better techniques." He saw progress as a straight line, where the old was rightfully discarded for the new. I was beginning to see it as a circle, where history and tradition held lessons that were timeless. This secret world, the world of the gilded spoon that was yet to be, was being built in the quiet hours of the night, in the fragrant steam of my oven, a silent rebellion he was too arrogant to even notice. The day of the magazine interview dawned with a cold, sterile light, the kind that seems to bleach all the color from the world. The magazine was Culinary Heights, the absolute pinnacle of food journalism. A feature in its glossy pages could solidify a chef's legacy. This wasn't just an interview, it was a coronation. Our apartment had been transformed into a photo studio. Lights were set up, reflectors were positioned, and a team of stylists and photographers moved with a hushed reverence, as if in a cathedral. Jonathan was in his element, gliding through the chaos with an easy, practiced charm. He was dressed in a crisp, dark shirt that made him look serious and artistic. I, on the other hand, had been styled. A woman I'd never met had chosen a simple, cream-colored cashmere sweater for me. "We want you to look soft, approachable," she'd said. The perfect complement to Jonathan's intensity. I felt like a prop, a carefully chosen accessory designed to enhance the leading man. My role was simple: sit, smile, and adore. I watched as the journalist, Anya Sharma, began her interview. She was sharp, her questions insightful and precise. She didn't just ask about his techniques, she asked about his philosophy, his inspiration, his why. Jonathan, to his credit, was brilliant. He spoke about food with a poet's passion and a scientist's precision. He was weaving a narrative, and everyone in the room was captivated. I sat on the edge of the plush sofa, my hands clasped in my lap, feeling smaller and smaller with every word he spoke. His family was there too, of course. Eleanor and his father had been invited to provide a few quotes about Jonathan's early signs of genius. They sat just off camera, beaming with a pride so intense it was almost blinding. They looked at him as if he were a visiting god. And they looked at me with a benign neglect, the loyal consort who knew her place. I was an observer at my own husband's life story. I tried to keep the serene, supportive smile plastered on my face, but my insides were a roiling knot of anxiety. I kept smoothing down my sweater, picking at a loose thread on the cuff. I could feel Anya Sharma's gaze drift to me from time to time. Her eyes were different. They weren't fawning or dismissive. They were observant. She saw me. She saw me fidgeting, saw the way my smile didn't quite reach my eyes. I had a tiny speck of flour under my thumbnail from my secret baking session the night before, a trace of my real life that I'd failed to scrub away. I saw her notice it, and a jolt of panic went through me. The tension in the room was all for him. The tension of a great man being documented for history. But the tension inside me was something else entirely. It was the frantic, buzzing energy of a bird trapped in a cage made of cashmere and condescension. And I had a terrible, sinking feeling that the door was about to be opened. The interview was winding down, and Jonathan was basking in the glow of his own brilliance. He had just finished a captivating anecdote about foraging for rare sea herbs on a windswept cliff in Brittany. The room was silent, hanging on his every word. Anya Sharma smiled, closed her notebook, and then did something that shifted the entire gravitational pull of the room. She turned to me. Her gaze was direct and kind, a stark contrast to the reverential awe directed at my husband. "And Isla," she said, her voice cutting through the thick air of adulation. "Jonathan tells me you're quite the baker. We've seen your lovely cakes at a few charity events. Do you have any professional aspirations yourself? A little cafe, perhaps?" The question hung in the air, a sudden, bright spotlight thrown onto my shadowy corner of the stage. For a single, breathtaking second, I felt seen. My heart gave a hopeful leap. Here it was a chance to speak, to claim a tiny piece of this world for myself. I opened my mouth to answer, to tell her about my grandmother's books, about the Savoy cake, about the stories hidden in sugar and flour. But before a single sound could escape my lips, Jonathan chuckled. It wasn't a loud laugh. It was a soft, dismissive little puff of air, a sound I knew better than my own heartbeat. It was the sound of my dreams being waved away like an inconvenient gnat. He leaned forward, placing a proprietary hand on my knee. "Oh, Anya, you're very kind to ask," he said, his voice dripping with condescending affection. "Isla is a wonderful home cook." He paused, letting the trivializing praise settle over me like a shroud. Then he delivered the final, fatal blow. "But a pastry is a pastry, it's not serious culinary art." He said it with a smile, as if sharing a charming private joke. His mother, Eleanor, let out a little titter of agreement from the sidelines. The photographer, who had been about to pack up, froze. The stylist looked at the floor. In the sudden, ringing silence of that perfectly curated room, I could feel every single person's reaction. I saw the flicker of pity in Anya Sharma's eyes before she expertly masked it with a professional smile. It was worse than scorn. It was the look you give a child who has just been told Santa isn't real. In that one moment, he hadn't just dismissed my passion. He had publicly, casually, and completely annihilated my worth. He had drawn a line in the sand, placing himself on the side of serious art, and me on the side of frivolous, unimportant trifles. The cream cashmere sweater suddenly felt like a straitjacket. The charming wife, the quaint hobbyist, the woman who brings the nice desserts. That's all I was, and all I would ever be allowed to be in his world. The sound of his chuckle echoed in my ears, the death knell of the person I had been trying so desperately to be for his sake. A breaking point isn't always a loud explosion. Sometimes it's a quiet little laugh. The ride home was a study in silence. A thick, suffocating blanket of it filled the car. Jonathan, however, didn't seem to notice. He was effervescent, practically vibrating with the success of the interview. He replayed his own clever answers, critiqued the lighting, and speculated on which photo they would choose for the cover. He was the star of a movie only he was watching. He turned to me once, his face glowing. "That went well, don't you think?" Anya was really impressed. "I think the third star is in the bag." He didn't ask about his comment. He didn't notice the rigid set of my jaw or the way I was staring out the window, watching the city lights blur into meaningless streaks. To him, the interview had been a triumph. The stray remark about my baking was less than a footnote. It was a forgotten word. When we got back to the apartment, the silence I had been carefully cultivating finally broke. He came up behind me as I stood in the middle of our cold, pristine living room and wrapped his arms around my waist. "What's wrong, darling? You've been quiet." The casual, oblivious nature of the question was like a lit match to a fuse. I pulled away from him. "What's wrong?" My voice was low, trembling with a rage that had been simmering for years. "You publicly humiliated me, Jonathan. You dismissed my entire world, everything I love, as if it were a child's finger painting." He had the audacity to look confused. "What are you talking about? The pastry comment?" "Isla, don't be so sensitive." And there it was. The ultimate gaslighter's trump card. I was being sensitive. "It's not art, Isla, it's just not. It's a different category of thing. Why is that so insulting? I said you were a wonderful home cook." It was a compliment. It was a dismissal. I finally shouted, the sound echoing in the cavernous, silent apartment. "It was you in front of everyone, patting me on the head and telling me to run along and play while the adults talk about serious things." The argument escalated, a storm that had been gathering for a decade. He accused me of being jealous, of trying to steal his spotlight on the most important day of his career. He told me I was being irrational, emotional. He used every weapon in his arsenal to make me feel small, crazy, and wrong. And with every word he spoke, a cold, hard clarity began to form in my mind. This wasn't about a single comment. It was about a fundamental, unbridgeable chasm of disrespect. He didn't see me. He had never seen me. He only saw a reflection of himself, a supporting character in his grand narrative. I stopped yelling. A strange calm settled over me. "You're right," I said softly. His face relaxed into a relieved smile, thinking he'd won. "I am being irrational," I continued, my voice steady. "To have ever thought this could work." That night I packed. It didn't take long. Most of the things in that apartment felt like they belonged to a stranger. I left the designer clothes, the expensive jewelry, the life that was a costume. I packed a suitcase with my most comfortable jeans, a few sweaters, and my grandmother's recipe books. And then I went into the kitchen. I looked at the gleaming, soulless expanse of chrome and steel. And there, on its own dedicated counter, was my stand mixer. It was a heavy-duty, professional-grade machine, the one extravagant gift I'd ever bought for myself. It was scarred with nicks from stray spoons and permanently dusted with a fine layer of flour in its crevices. It was the only thing in that kitchen that felt like it was truly mine. It was heavy, awkward to carry, but I lifted it into my arms. It felt like I was rescuing a part of my own soul. I walked out of that apartment without looking back, leaving only a short note on the kitchen island, right where he used to sketch his plating diagrams. It said, "I've gone to pursue my not-so-serious art. I hope you get your third star." My escape was funded by what I called my secret life savings. For years, I had been doing small, under-the-table catering jobs for friends of friends, birthday cakes, holiday cookie platters, desserts for small parties. Jonathan had found it amusing, another one of my little projects. He never asked what I did with the money, likely assuming I spent it on shoes or other frivolous things he imagined I cared about. But I had been squirreling it away, every dollar, in a bank account he knew nothing about. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough. It was freedom. I spent the first week in a cheap motel, the unfamiliar lumps in the mattress a strange comfort. I was terrified, but it was a clean, sharp terror, not the dull, soul-crushing dread I had lived with for years. I spent my days walking through the city, exploring neighborhoods Jonathan would have considered beneath him. I was looking for a sign, a place that felt real, a place with a history. And then I found it. It was a narrow, forgotten street tucked away in a part of the city that was just beginning to stir with new life. The neighborhood was a patchwork of old brownstones, a family-run hardware store, a dusty record shop, and a handful of new, trendy boutiques. It had grit and character. And there on a corner was a small, derelict storefront. The green paint on the facade was peeling, the large front window was grimy with years of neglect, and a faded sign whispered the ghost of a long-dead business. O'Malley's Fine Haberdashery. It was perfect. It was a place no one would look for me. A place that needed to be brought back to life, just like me. The landlord was a man named Arthur Kowalski, a retired Polish immigrant with hands as gnarled as old tree roots and eyes that had seen everything. He was skeptical at first, looking at my soft hands and my determined, if slightly panicked, expression. "You want to open a bakery here?" he asked, his voice a gravelly rumble. "This place hasn't been open in 30 years. The plumbing is a mystery, and the oven is a relic from the Stone Age." I told him my plan. I wasn't going to open another trendy cupcake shop. I was going to sell pastries based on historical recipes. I was going to sell stories. He listened, stroking his magnificent white mustache, his expression unreadable. When I was done, he was quiet for a long time. Then he looked at the decrepit old oven in the back, a monstrous cast-iron beast. My wife, God rest her soul, she used to bake. She made a poppy seed roll, a mac a week, from her mother's recipe. The smell, it filled the whole building. He looked back at me, a flicker of something new in his eyes. "The plumbing is your problem. But the oven stays. You get it working, you make me that poppy seed roll, and the first 3 months' rent is on me." It was a challenge and a gift all in one. I took it. I spent every last cent of my savings on the deposit, on fresh paint, on industrial-grade cleaning supplies. I named my fledgling business the Gilded Spoon. It was a private joke, an ironic jab at the world I'd left behind, a world obsessed with golden surfaces and hollow interiors. This place would be the opposite. It would be real all the way through. As I stood in the empty, dusty space, the enormity of what I had done washed over me. The fear was immense. But for the first time in a decade, it was my own fear. And the hope, small as it was mine too. The first few months of the Gilded Spoon were a brutal baptism by fire, a trial of exhaustion and sheer will. I lived in a tiny, drafty apartment above the shop, and my days and nights blurred into one long cycle of mixing, baking, cleaning, and collapsing into bed for a few hours of sleep. My alarm went off at 3 a.m., the shrill sound cutting through the pre-dawn silence of the quiet street. I would stumble downstairs into the chilly bakery, my body aching in places I didn't know could ache. The physical labor was immense. I scraped decades of grime off the tile floors, painted the peeling walls a warm, creamy white myself, and spent days wrestling with Arthur's ancient, monstrous oven. It was temperamental, with hot spots and a finicky thermostat. Learning its quirks was like learning to dance with a surly, unpredictable partner. I burned more batches of scones than I care to admit, filling the small space with the acrid smell of failure. There were moments of deep, crushing doubt, where I would sit on a flour sack in the middle of the night, covered in flour and exhaustion, and think, Jonathan was right. This is a foolish, sentimental dream. My first customers were the locals, drawn in by the strange, enticing smells of cardamom, rosewater, and browning butter that now wafted out onto the street instead of the smell of dust and decay. They were skeptical. An old woman named Mrs. Gable, who had lived in the neighborhood for 60 years, poked a suspicious finger at my Victorian seed cake. "What's this then? Looks dry." I convinced her to try a slice on the house. She came back the next day and bought a whole cake. "Reminds me of my mother's," she grumbled, a high compliment from her. Arthur, my landlord, became my first regular. I finally perfected his wife's mac-a-week after a dozen tries, and the look on his face when he took the first bite was worth all the sleepless nights. He would come down every morning for a coffee and a pastry, his gruff presence a comforting fixture in my chaotic new life. He would offer unsolicited advice on everything from my bookkeeping to my window display, but underneath it all was a steady, quiet support that I had never known. Slowly, painstakingly, word began to spread. It wasn't just about the taste. It was about the novelty. People were intrigued by the stories behind the pastries. I wrote them out on small, handwritten cards placed next to each offering. The saffron cake, a favorite of Henry VIII, or the Joe Froggers, a molasses and rum cookie from 18th century Massachusetts. I was selling more than just food. I was selling a connection to the past. The turning point came on a dreary Tuesday in November, about 6 months after I opened. The bell above the door chimed, and when I looked up from the batch of dough I was kneading, I froze. Standing there, looking around the small, bustling shop with a thoughtful expression, was Anya Sharma, the journalist from the interview. My heart hammered against my ribs. She saw me, and a slow, genuine smile spread across her face. "I had a feeling I might find you in a place like this," she said, her eyes taking in the old oven, the mismatched chairs, the flour dusting everything. She told me she had been thinking about that day, about the look on my face after Jonathan's comment. She had followed a rumor from a fellow foodie about a new bakery in a forgotten neighborhood doing something unique. She ordered one of everything. She stayed for 2 hours, asking me questions, not about my famous ex-husband, but about me, about the recipes, about my grandmother, about the courage it took to start over. 2 weeks later, her article came out. It wasn't just a review, it was a story. She titled it, "The Gilded Spoon and the Serious Art of Baking." She wrote about the historical significance of the recipes, the edible history I was preserving. She wrote about the bakery as a haven of authenticity in a city obsessed with trends. And she ended the piece with a single, devastatingly powerful sentence. "It turns out the most serious culinary art isn't always found in temples of gastronomy, but sometimes in the quiet, passionate work of those who were told it wasn't art at all." The article didn't just go viral, it exploded. My little neighborhood bakery became a destination. The first Saturday after the review was published, I opened the door to find a line stretching down the block. It was terrifying and exhilarating. We sold out of everything by 10 a.m. I had to hire staff. A young eager baker named Leo who shared my passion for obscure techniques, and a friendly young woman named Sophia to manage the front of house. We became a small, tight-knit family. The lines never went away. The waiting list for custom cakes stretched to 3 months. I was working harder than ever, but it was a joyful, purposeful exhaustion. And then, one rainy April afternoon, an official-looking envelope arrived. I almost dismissed it as a tax form. I opened it absently while wiping down a counter. Inside was a letter from the James Beard Foundation. My hand started to shake so badly I could barely read the words. I was a finalist. Best pastry chef. I read it again, and then a third time, the words blurring through a sudden film of tears. I let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Leo and Sophia rushed over, thinking something was wrong. I just pointed at the letter, speechless. That night, after we celebrated with a bottle of cheap champagne Arthur brought over, I checked the full list of nominees and long list contenders online. And there, on the long list for Best Chef, a name I knew all too well, Jonathan Thorne. He hadn't made the finals. The irony was so thick, so rich, it was almost a meal in itself. A few hours later, my phone buzzed. A text from a number I had almost forgotten. It was from Jonathan. 2 words. Good luck. Not congratulations. Not I'm sorry. Just good luck. It was a token, a placeholder, a gesture as hollow as the life I had left behind. But it didn't matter. It couldn't touch me anymore. The night of the James Beard Awards was a surreal dream. A year ago, I had been packing a stand mixer into the back of my car, my entire world shattered. Now I was walking a red carpet, surrounded by the brightest stars of the culinary world. I wore a simple, elegant dark blue dress I'd bought from a vintage shop, a stark contrast to the designer gowns around me. I felt like an imposter, a baker from a tiny neighborhood shop who had somehow slipped past the guards. But I wasn't alone. I had brought Leo and Sophia with me, their faces shining with an excitement that mirrored my own. Arthur had insisted on flying in for the occasion, dressed in a slightly too small suit, looking every bit the proud, protective father figure he had become. They were my family now, the family I had built. I saw Jonathan across the vast, glittering ballroom. He was standing with a group of other high-profile chefs, a glass of champagne in his hand. He looked different, smaller somehow, without the familiar backdrop of his restaurant or the adoring gaze of his family. He caught my eye, and for a fleeting moment, I saw a flicker of something unreadable in his expression before he turned away. My category was one of the last of the evening. As they read the names of the nominees, my heart felt like it was going to beat its way out of my chest. Leo gripped my hand on one side, Sophia on the other. I heard my name and the name of my bakery, Isla of the Gilded Spoon. The presenter, a legendary chef I had admired my entire life, opened the envelope. A pause that stretched for an eternity. And then she smiled. And the winner is Isla Thorne, the Gilded Spoon. For a second, the name didn't register. Isla Thorne. I hadn't used that name in a year. The room erupted in applause. Leo and Sophia were screaming, hugging me. Arthur was on his feet, clapping so hard his knuckles were white. I felt a gentle push towards the stage. The walk felt 1,000 miles long. I was floating, disconnected from my own body. I reached the podium, my hands trembling as I took the heavy, bronze medallion. I looked out at the sea of faces, a blur of lights and shadows. And I began to speak. Thank you. I started, my voice shaky at first, then growing stronger. A little over a year ago, someone I respected very much told me that what I do, that pastry, is not serious culinary art. A quiet murmur went through the room. I didn't look at Jonathan, but I could feel his gaze on me like a physical weight. He was wrong, I said, my voice clear and steady now. Serious art is not about a price tag or a fancy technique. It's about passion. It's about story. It's about preserving a memory and creating a new one in the same bite. I dedicated the award to my grandmother and to all the women like her, whose names are not on famous restaurants, but whose love and labor have been the true foundation of our culinary history. This is for all the not-so-serious artists, I concluded. Our work matters. The applause was deafening. It was more than just polite clapping. It was a roar of approval, of understanding. It was validation. After the ceremony, as I was surrounded by a crush of well-wishers, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned, and there he was. Jonathan. He was holding 2 glasses of champagne, a practiced, charming smile fixed on his face. It was the same smile he used for journalists and investors. Isla, he said, his voice smooth as silk. Congratulations. Truly. I always knew you had it in you. The words, meant to sound gracious, were a stunning, audacious attempt to rewrite history. He was trying to position himself as my secret mentor, the one who saw my potential all along. He was trying to claim a sliver of my victory, to absorb my light into his own narrative. The old me, the Isla who craved his approval, would have been flustered, would have perhaps accepted the champagne and murmured a thank you. But that Isla was gone. I looked at him, at the carefully constructed facade, and I felt nothing but a calm, quiet clarity. I didn't take the glass he offered. No, you didn't, Jonathan, I said, my voice even and gentle, which seemed to unnerve him more than shouting would have. You never knew. You never even looked. His smile faltered, a crack in the perfect veneer. This, I said, gesturing around at the glittering room, at the medallion I held in my hand. This didn't happen because of you. It happened in spite of you. I saw a flash of anger in his eyes, quickly replaced by a wounded look. It was a performance, and I was no longer his audience. I'm happy now, Jonathan, I said. And I have work to do. Excuse me. I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there alone with his 2 glasses of champagne. I walked back to my real family, to Arthur, Leo, and Sophia, who were waiting for me with genuine smiles and open arms. That, right there, was the real award. It wasn't the bronze medallion. It was the freedom to walk away. A year has passed since that night. The Gilded Spoon is no longer just a tiny neighborhood shop. We've expanded into the storefront next door, the one that used to be the dusty record shop. We now have a dedicated classroom space where I teach the history and technique of the recipes my grandmother left me. I love watching the faces of my students, their delight in discovering the stories baked into a simple loaf of bread or an intricate pie. Leo is now my head baker, and his creativity is pushing us in new, exciting directions. Sophia manages the entire front-of-house operation with an efficiency and warmth that is the heart of our customer experience. We are a team, a real one. The James Beard medallion sits on a simple shelf in my office, next to a framed photo of my grandmother. It's a wonderful honor, but it's not the thing that defines me. A few months ago, a letter arrived. It was on heavy, cream-colored stationery I recognized instantly. It was from Eleanor, Jonathan's mother. I opened it with a strange sense of detachment. It was a long, rambling letter, full of self-pity and thinly veiled accusations. She wrote about how difficult things had been for Jonathan since the unpleasantness. Aperture had lost its momentum. The talk of a 3rd star had evaporated. He was, in her words, struggling to find his inspiration again. She wrote that she was sorry if my feelings had been hurt, but that families go through misunderstandings, and that perhaps it was time for me to be the bigger person and reach out to him. There was no real apology, no acknowledgement of the years of dismissal. It was a plea for me to return to my old role, to come back and soothe the brilliant, wounded man-child they had created. I read the letter, folded it neatly, and placed it in a box of old business receipts. It wasn't worthy of an emotional response. It was just an artifact from a different life, a life that no longer belonged to me. My world is no longer gilded with the approval of others. It's forged from my own hard work, my own passion, and the love of the family I chose for myself. Looking back, I can see the whole journey so clearly now. The years of feeling small, the constant, quiet pain of being underestimated, it was all just fuel. I used to think that my love for baking was a weakness, a soft, sentimental part of me that was out of place in Jonathan's sharp, ambitious world. But I was wrong. It was my greatest strength. That passion was an anchor in the storm of his ego, a secret garden I tended when the world outside was cold and sterile. The breaking point, that awful, humiliating moment, felt like the end of the world. But it was a necessary end. It was the violent, painful shattering of a beautiful cage. I had to be broken down to my very foundations so I could rebuild myself into someone authentic, someone strong. The greatest award I have ever received is not the bronze medallion from the James Beard Foundation. The greatest award is waking up every morning, smelling the scent of sugar and yeast, and knowing that the life I am living is one I built with my own 2 hands, on my own terms. I learned that serious art is simply any passion that you pursue with the full depth of your heart and soul. It has nothing to do with what others deem important or worthy. Your value is not a reflection in someone else's eyes. It is a fire you tend within yourself. And that is the thought I want to leave you all with today. Never, ever let someone else's definition of success become your own. Never let someone's limited imagination limit your own dreams. Your passion, no matter how small or unserious it may seem to others, is valid. It is your power. I would love it if you shared your own story in the comments below. Tell me about a time you were underestimated and how you proved them wrong. Your stories give me and everyone else here so much strength. And if my story resonated with you today, please don't forget to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel for more stories of finding your own way. Share this video with anyone who might need to hear that their passion matters. Thank you so much for listening to my journey. I wish you all the strength to pursue your own not-so-serious art with all the seriousness in your heart.